Professional photographers are well aware of the dramatic results that can be achieved by changing a camera's lens length. They do so not just to vary the way a particular object is framed within the view, but to also psychologically change the way a given shot might be interpreted by their audience. You see, a simple lens change can take a character in a story from a position of power to a position of weakness in moments, all accomplished simply by the lens length that's chosen for the camera. To illustrate that, I'll be using a file named Camera Lens. You can find it in the Working Files folder. Let's go ahead and select the camera in the view, then head over to the Modify column to take a look at our options. Note the selection of stock lenses that Max offers. Each lens, if attached to the camera, will make the scene look just a little bit different. Take note that the default lens length is just a little over 43 millimeters. Max uses that specific length as a way to accurately match what the camera sees to that of the human eye. In other words, a length of 43 millimeters on a camera in 3ds Max most closely simulates human vision. Now watch what switching to a different lens length does to what we actually see in the camera view. In our selection of stock lenses, let's change to a 20 millimeter lens. A short or small lens length, in other words, anything between 20 and 30 millimeters, is typically referred to as a wide-angle lens. You can see how far the camera's viewing area now spreads to the sides if looking in the top view. Wide-angle lenses, like the one we're using here, tend to exaggerate and distort the perspective of a shot. Many would also say that a short lens length will provide more of a feeling of massiveness to the objects in view. Now, as we discuss how a certain lens length changes the way things look in the viewport, it's important to know that the field of view, in other words, what you actually see inside the camera frame, changes inversely with the lens length that's being used. Simply put, shorter lens lengths, in other words, a smaller millimeter value, will produce a wider field of view. That many times referred to as simply FOV. Using a longer lens, in other words, a lens with a higher millimeter number, will produce more of a narrow field of view. And you can see that here. With the short 20 millimeter lens, notice how far to the sides the camera reaches in the view. That field of view also making our objects look a little farther away than they actually are. If we change to, let's say, an 85 millimeter lens, you can see how the side-to-side field of view has been substantially reduced. Again, quite noticeable when looking in the top view. Now, a lens with a length of 85 millimeters or longer is typically referred to as a telephoto lens. You've more than likely heard that term before. Lenses in this length range usually minimize the effects of perspective distortion that you sometimes get when using shorter lenses. But the longer lens does come with a few drawbacks. One being the fact that longer lenses create a smaller viewing area. And two, telephoto type lenses have a tendency to flatten out the dimensions within a scene, creating the effect that objects look closer to each other than they actually are. You can see both things happening here when looking in the camera view. So here we've seen two completely different representations of the objects in our scene. One making things look more distant than they actually are, while the other creating the illusion that our scene objects are vastly closer than they indeed are. Now think about it, all that created by simply changing the lens length on our camera. Let's switch our camera back to using a 50 millimeter lens. That's as close as we can get to returning to human vision using the out-of-the-box stock lenses that Max offers. Now, something you many times see in movies or in TV dramas is an effect where the camera either pulls tight or pushes away from the scene's main area of interest. That being done by animating the camera's lens length over a period of time. Let's see if we can't do that. Leaving our time slider at frame 0, let's change the length of our lens to 20 millimeters. We'll now activate Auto Key, then move to frame 70. Once in that position, back on the right-hand side, we'll change the lens length to 85 millimeters. Now, that is a little bit too tight, so back in the Modify column in the Parameters category, let's adjust the spinner for the lens length. What I'm wanting to do is to decrease my millimeter length so I can at least see the top of my characters' heads. Okay, once we've done that, we'll turn Auto Key off and scrub through our timeline. You can see that shortening of the lens in both the top and left view as I scrub through the animation. Why don't we now activate the camera view and we'll play back the animation. Now, make sure you understand, this isn't the same as dollying a camera. With that technique, the camera's picked up and moved in and out on a track. No, with animating the lens length, the camera stays fixed in position. The effect created by simply changing the field of view, or lens length in other words. Two completely different techniques, each designed to leave a different impression on the viewer. So that'll give you a few things that you can do with changing a camera's lens. A powerful tool if used in the right way. I'll save this out as camera lens completed if you'd like to look it over.